Good afternoon and welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I am Angela Hiller, Program Manager for the Programs team. I work with our work-based learning and apprenticeship platforms. We're thrilled to have you here for our NAWB event, The Power of Apprenticeships to Address the Workforce Shortage. As we explore the impact of apprenticeships on employee development, retention, and long-term job satisfaction, we also want to take a moment to invite you to consider becoming a member of NAWB. Membership provides access to valuable resources, networking opportunities, policy alerts, our weekly newsletter, and a collective voice to advocate for workforce development across the country. We hope you'll join us in strengthening the workforce system that supports communities nationwide. If you want to learn more about NAWB membership, please email us at nawb@nawb.org. If you have any questions during the webinar, please enter them into the chat. Otherwise, we will have time at the end for Q&A. Thanks again for being here. Now I'm proud to introduce Jim Wilson, the Director of Professional Advancement with the National Restaurant Association Education Foundation, and Chad Mortray, the Vice President of Research and Knowledge with the National Restaurant Association.
Thank you, Angela. This is Chad Mortray. I'm going to share my slides here, and we're going to start off by going through a quick overview of what's happening in the economy, and that will lay the groundwork for what you really came for, which is Jim Wilson and the conversation about apprenticeships. But I think it's good to kind of just get the lay of the land in terms of the labor market right now and the overall economy. So hence you have an economist here talking about that. But before we get going on what I see in the outlook, I'm going to ask you guys, what are you seeing, right? How would you characterize the business outlook for your firm, your company right now? And we'll give that a couple minutes. We'll see how positive or negative you guys are. Certainly no shortage of news to digest in terms of things that are going on in the economy right now. So no one is very negative. That's good, I guess. And it looks like roughly 60% positive, right? Mostly on the somewhat positive camp, and roughly 40% somewhat negative. So that's good. A little bit of a mix there, but certainly more positive than not. So I'm gonna end the poll here, and we'll see after I talk if you still are upbeat. I guess. So anyway, let's go into. So there's my title and my Twitter feed. So you feel free to follow me if you wish to do so. And let's just dive right into my overall outlook. I'm going to move this over here so I can see the slides myself. So the good news here is that we continue to see a very resilient economy, right? Even with all the challenges, with all of the news that is out there, we still had 2.3% growth in the fourth quarter. We're hovering in the low twos right now for the first quarter. In fact, Atlanta Fed just came out with a projection for the first quarter of 2.3. It's still early, but you see I have us growing at 2% in the first quarter, roughly 2.4% this year. So a little bit cooler growth this year than last, but at least for right now, people are still spending, right? And that's keeping us propped up. Now there's obviously a lot of headwinds out there to talk about, and that's certainly getting the focus right now, right? Everyone is talking about tariffs, about higher costs. Lots of geopolitical risks that are out there as part of the overall conversation. Everyone is talking about eggs in terms from the restaurant standpoint, but there are a lot of other cost pressures as well, and just in lots of political uncertainty, right? On the upside, though, and I have long been in the soft landing camp. I still think we're going to avoid a recession this year, and that's largely because the labor market continues to expand, right? We still are having labor market growth. It's clearly cooled off relative to where it was a year or two ago, but because the labor market is still solid, spending is still pretty decent, right? Especially amongst higher income groups, right? So you still see that bit of a bifurcation amongst consumers, but largely people keep spending. And I could put monetary policy in either of these two. It probably is in the middle. It's really neutral at this point. The Fed will cut rates sometime later this year, maybe, but they're no longer really hiking. It's more a matter of just kind of in a wait and see posture. Lots of upside and downside risks there, but at least for right now, much like you, I am more positive than not. The overall labor market does continue to expand solidly, right? You've seen a little bit of softening in that January number, but that was somewhat mitigated by the fact that you had some pretty significant upward revisions to some of the prior months, including in November and December. And so still solid growth overall in terms of non-farm payrolls. And the unemployment rate is 4%. Excuse me, that's still a really good number, right? So we're not far from what we economists call full employment. Obviously, 2 years ago, we were at 50-year lows, right, at that 3.4 range, but and we've moved up from there, but 4% is still a number that is very, very good. We have had some success in moving people off the sidelines. In fact, you had a little bit of an increase of moving people back into the labor market in January, so that was a nice positive. In general, though, you can see here that it really hasn't budged all that much over the past year. We would like to get more people back in the labor market, and that certainly helps with overall labor market conditions, but it has somewhat languished. I did mention the jump up in employment in January, because this is a huge jump in employment. We'll see if that gets kind of pushed back down in revisions when we get the February data. But it does show you we did have a little bit of success in getting more people into the labor market in January, which again, if you're recruiting at all, that's something that you want to see. Because the labor market has stayed relatively solid, wage growth also continues to be pretty solid, right? And so you're seeing, I'll show you for restaurants in a second. This is for all workers, for all private sector production and non-supervisory workers. It was up 4.2% on a year-over-year basis. And so we're still seeing pretty solid wage growth in the overall economy. And that's true even for restaurants, right? So now on the restaurant side, we did have a pretty weak number in January, which was surprising because as you saw earlier, overall employment has been pretty decent. And if you look at the second half of last year, we were seeing some rebounds in employment. And so I do think that January number was a bit of an aberration. It could have been the Gulf Coast snow. There was snow on the Gulf Coast in ways that you don't normally see very often. And so it could have been a little bit of that. Hopefully, we'll see a bit of a rebound in the February data. Overall, though, you were seeing a much stronger labor market growth in the restaurant sector in the second half of last year relative to the first, and I would expect that to continue. When you're looking at the kind of that longer term trend, we are about 70,000 or so above pre-pandemic levels for restaurant employment. And so that's obviously a nice positive, especially given how devastated the sector was in those first couple months of the pandemic. But that's the larger aggregate number. When you look kind of behind the scenes and look at the various categories of restaurants, you can see that full service employment continues to lag behind. It's about 220,000 fewer workers today than it had lost in those first 2 months of the pandemic. So we really have never fully recovered those pandemic losses in the full service sector. And so you're continuing to see even declining traffic in that space, although hopefully that's starting to stabilize. The difference here, and the reason why we are now above pre-pandemic levels, is because that has been more than made up in quick service and fast casual, in snack and alcoholic beverage bars. We all love going and getting our coffee or smoothies or Auntie Anne's or whatever, right? As well as bars. We all are going out and drinking, I guess. And so all of those categories, you're seeing some positive growth relative to the pandemic losses, and that's more than making up for some weakness that we've seen in the full service segment. One of the numbers that we watch very closely, certainly the Fed watches this very closely as well, is something we call JOLTS, the Job Openings and Labor Turnover Survey data. Job openings, as you can see here, clearly they've cooled pretty significantly. If you go back 2 years ago at this time, uh, everyone was scrambling for talent, right? The number of job openings were at record highs. Quits were at record highs. It was kind of dubbed the Great Resignation. And everywhere I went, people were complaining about where am I going to get workers, right? So that was where we were, and you can see the labor overall job openings and the overall market has cooled pretty significantly since then. Um, but we still have 912,000 job openings in the restaurants and accommodations sector, right? So still a pretty solid reading, essentially back at pre-pandemic levels, but still a pretty solid number overall. And I did mention the Great Resignation. This is my Great Resignation chart, right? And so you can see here, quits. 2 years ago, this was the take your job and shove it economy, right? Again, record high levels of quits, both in the restaurant sector as well as in the overall economy. Those numbers have come down, and actually, the quit rate right now is below pre-pandemic levels. So we're seeing a very significant reduction in churn. This is now referred to as the Great Stay. If you've following the lingo in the labor market, we've moved from the Great Resignation to the Great Stay. And again, if you're in HR, this is a number that you want to see, right? It shows that the churn has really pulled back pretty significantly. Despite that, we still are in an environment where people are still saying, where are the workers going to come from, right? So you've seen that cooling pull back pretty significantly, but you still have roughly 700,000 more job openings than people who are unemployed. And so, that phenomenon where we had this kind of this upside down ratio of job openings to the number of unemployed really never existed before 2018. And other than the pandemic, it has existed pretty much every year since then. This number has narrowed, but my expectation, I know Jim has heard me say this before, is that we're going to be talking about this for the next decade or more, largely because of demographics. As more baby boomers retire, eventually those of us in Gen X will retire, and the birth rates are at historic lows, right? We really haven't seen the birth rate this low since 1979, and so demographics are not our friend. Immigration could play a role here, but as you all know, immigration is also right now challenged as well. So I do think that this is going to be one of those things that's going to keep workforce in the news and as a challenge for restaurants and for the overall economy for years to come, and certainly from an apprenticeship standpoint, one of the reasons why we want to look at that as a possible answer. So I wanted to throw this in here. We don't have the February data yet because it's not March, but we pulled this data from Lightcast. I know that the NRA Education Foundation uses a lot of Lightcast data as well. So this is just looking at all of the job postings in the restaurant sector. This is all postings. For those of you who are really data nerds like me, you know that Lightcast actually has total postings, but also unique postings, because some postings are posted more than once. I'm just giving you the total here. And you can see here are these are the largest job titles that you would see in the postings that were posted for restaurant and eating places over the last year. So again, not a total shock there in terms of what those job postings are, but certainly I think helps give some color to what restaurants are looking for right now. So I told you I would give you the restaurant wage pressure number, and it's still roughly 4% year over year. Again, lots of volatility in that number regionally. There's a lot of initiatives, particularly at the local and regional level, that are pushing some wages up on the local level or the state level at a faster pace. And so we're perhaps seeing faster wage growth on the West Coast, for instance, but overall still a pretty solid number, much like kind of that overall national number. So for restaurant sales, there is this sense of resilience there, right? So restaurant operators are challenged, and we'll see that in a second when I talk about real sales. This is nominal. We have seen for 10 straight months now an increase in our overall restaurant sales. Now that's not the what you would hear if you're looking at most news stories, right? But again, a little bit of resilience there, even in the January number. Now, what's interesting about that January number is, as I mentioned earlier, when you look at overall consumer spending in January, it was weaker in January because of some of the winter weather we've seen, the fires in LA, et cetera. But restaurants actually were one of the bright spots, right? So this number was revised. I originally had an error on this slide. The December number actually was originally down. It was revised a bit higher. And a large part of why December was originally a little weaker was because of the kind of truncation between Thanksgiving and Christmas. There was a much shorter period where we all kind of felt stressed about, how little time there was between Thanksgiving and the holidays. But that you see here essentially was revised up just a bit. So 10 straight months of nominal growth. With that said, on a real basis, when you strip out prices, they're essentially flat. They're up about 1% year over year in the January number. That January really reflects kind of that strength we saw in January. If you go back to December, it was essentially flat year to year in December. So obviously prices are taking a big bite out of those overall sales. And when you talk to restaurant operators themselves, they tell me a lot about all the cost pressures that they have on wages, on food, insurance, a bunch of other categories. And so that's often what you hear. And in fact, when we go out and ask our members about some of the top challenges that they see, recruiting employees is towards the top of the list. But you also see the economy, the labor costs, et cetera, is some of the things that are top of mind for them. Now, I mentioned that we go out on a regular basis. We do have something called the Restaurant Performance Index. This is what looks like for the last couple of decades. And it has, like a lot of business surveys, it spiked after the election, right? A lot of optimism about taxes and regulations, et cetera. It has pulled back from that optimism in the most recent data, but it's essentially at par right now. I think so it's essentially 100, and numbers over 100 are expansion, numbers under 100 are contraction. We'll see where that number goes moving forward, given a lot of the talk about tariffs and higher costs, et cetera. But for right now, it is essentially at par. And you can see kind of that illustrated in the next couple charts. This is more information than you probably wanted to know, but when we ask about the next 6 months, you can see that flip from before the election and after the election of the flip in optimism there. Although it did pull back in the month of January, and you still have more people positive about their outlook than not. Again, mirroring what you guys said early on. In terms of staffing, slightly positive. 20% say that they expect to increase staffing over the next 6 months versus 18 that are planning to lower their staffing, et cetera. So that will give you a little bit of a sense in terms of those overall expectations. This is my last slide before we turn it over to Jim. We just released our State of the Industry report a couple weeks ago, and so this is one of the things that is in there. And so you can see that in 2024, the restaurant and food service industry had 15.7 million jobs. So that's the 12.5 million for restaurants, right? But we add in 3.2 million that work in any food service job. So that's food service in a hospital, in a school, or wherever else it might be, military, et cetera. And then this year, we're expecting to see an increase of 200,000 workers in that sector, up to 15.9. So again, a new all-time high, obviously about 1% increase. And over the next decade, we expect that number to grow to 17.4 million. And so 1 out of every 10 Americans works in the restaurant and food service sector. And so we continue to see growth there, again, even with all of the challenges that we see. So with that, oh, I do have one more slide. I lied. Uh, so one of the things that we are looking at is technology. In fact, I've written a paper that's coming out in a couple of weeks on how restaurant operators are using technology to solve some of the workforce issues. And so technology certainly is having an impact in terms of improving efficiency, and you're seeing it being used in places like employee training and for recruitment and retention, although there's clearly a lot of work to do to increase those numbers. So anyway, with that, now we will turn it over to Jim, and I believe that there is another survey question. So I'm going to turn off my volume here and turn it over to you, Jim.
Thanks, Chad. And here is my question. So for you on the call, how familiar are you with the apprenticeship model? Very familiar, somewhat familiar, or not familiar at all? A couple more seconds, and then how do we show the poll? I'm not sure how to do that if I'm not the... There we go.
Yeah.
All right. Perfect. Thank you. So good. A fair amount are very familiar, and over half are somewhat familiar, and only 10% are not familiar at all. Perfect. All right. So let's get started then. So I'm Jim Wilson. I'm with the National Restaurant Association Educational Foundation. And these are kind of our three core pillars, if you will. Our goal is to attract, empower, and advance people within the restaurant and hospitality industry. And something that I love about apprenticeships is that really it hits on all three pieces of this. We attract people through pre-apprenticeship as well as apprenticeship. We're able to empower them by giving them opportunities to grow and learn within the industry. And then obviously that helps them to advance with the industry. So the apprenticeship model is perfect for these three pillars, and we'll go a little bit further into it. Next slide. This shows you some of the different programs that we have at the foundation. And we can help support people in the industry from work readiness all the way to the executive level. Starting at the work readiness level, we've got a program called Restaurant Ready, which is used across the country. It's currently used in 35 states, and different community-based organizations use this for people that are looking to enter the workforce. And it really focuses on some of those work readiness skills. We always kind of say it's mislabeled because it's not really for restaurant specific skills, but more work readiness skills. And that's used a lot. The Restaurant Ready model is used a lot with our HOPES program, which is a re-entry program that we currently have in 6 states across the country. And so this is people re-entering from either incarceration or people that have been just as involved, and then working with the CBO to get them those job readiness skills, and then partnering with some of our restaurant operators to get them positions within those. Moving on to the professional level, our most popular program probably is ProStart, which has been around for 25 years now. It is in all 50 states. It's used in over 2,100 high schools, and it has over 200,000 students that go through this. And it's a 2-year high school curriculum that focuses on both front of the house and back of the house. You'll see Restaurant Ready and HOPES again there. We have advanced training for military, so people exiting military service and getting them into the culinary or hospitality industry. You'll see apprenticeships, Skill Bridge, which is another one of our military programs. Moving on to the supervisor role, you'll see, once again, registered apprenticeships, as well as our scholarship. So we give over $2 million a year in scholarships to people that are going to post-secondary for culinary or hospitality. Moving on to manager, you will see registered apprenticeship again. So this is another thing that I really enjoy about apprenticeship is that it can work with somebody throughout their career. Really, if you include pre-apprenticeship, you could include this in that work readiness component all the way up to the manager level. Next slide, please. So what is apprenticeship? I would say there's really kind of three key components to an apprenticeship. The first component is that the apprentice would be an employee, not necessarily a full-time employee, but they would be an employee that is paid by the employer. So this is not an internship. This is not like a job study or something along those lines. This is somebody that you are looking to not only retain, but really grow within your company. And that this is across the board. This is not just specific to the hospitality or culinary industry. This is apprenticeship. So first of all, they're an employee, so that they are a paid employee. The second is that they will have a supervisor that will oversee what they call the on-the-job training, or the OJT. And then the third component is that they will receive related technical or related training instruction. And that's kind of the classroom work or the online work. So those are the three kind of key pieces to any apprenticeship. Next slide. Now, why apprenticeship? So there's a number of benefits for employers. As Chad just mentioned, hiring is huge, but retention and retaining your top employees is a huge component right now that we're dealing with. Apprenticeships offer you the ability to expand your pipeline. So you can recruit from, as I mentioned, ProStart students, from restaurant-ready CBOs. For your current staff, it's an opportunity to upskill them, whether it's into a management role or as a line cook. It addresses those barriers for learning and promotion. So many times, restaurant operators are very small. The majority of our restaurant operators, are small operators. They don't have an HR department. They don't have a training department. And this offers them that opportunity to have a training program developed specifically for them. And then the huge piece is that retention part. Within our restaurant manager program, we have an 80% retention component. And that's the huge piece. We talk a lot about recruiting employees, but retaining your top employees is crucial, especially in this market, as Chad just highlighted. Next slide, please. So we have 5 different pathways or occupations that we have at the National Restaurant Association Educational Foundation. We have line cook, kitchen manager, and restaurant manager, which are kind of our 3 core occupations. And then we also have assistant kitchen manager and assistant restaurant manager. Our apprenticeships are competency-based. So students coming out of the ProStart program or coming out of a culinary school are going to have a leg up because they will have already tackled a number of the competencies that are going to be covered. But we say for somebody coming in off of the street with zero background knowledge in the culinary industry, that line cook, it'll take them about a year to complete. Kitchen manager would take them about a year and a half. And then the restaurant manager would take them about 2 years. And the requirements that we have for those are that they must have a diploma or a GED to complete the program, and they must be 17 years or older. To have that high school diploma or GED, they can also be working on that throughout the process of the apprenticeship. So just to receive that final credential from the U.S. Department of Labor, they must have that GED. Next slide. Additional requirements as a part of an apprenticeship is that the apprentice must receive a wage increase during the apprenticeship. And this is, when you think about it, your apprentice is going to be with you for a line cook about a year. They're going to receive a wage increase during that time, no matter if they're in an apprenticeship or not. And then another component is that apprenticeship ratio. For us, Our ratio is 2-to-1, so each supervisor can have a maximum of 2 apprentices that they oversee. You can have 1-to-1, but the max that you can have is 2-to-1 for our apprenticeship. You will have some states that will have their own ratios, and they might have a 1-to-1 or a different ratio as well. Next slide. As I mentioned, so there's the related training or related technical instruction. These are some of the examples of what the line cook and the restaurant manager would go through. We have all of these available online, so they can be self-guided, self-paced. The apprentice can go through them on their own time to complete these courses. You'll see ServeSafe, which everybody within the industry goes through. Your certified kitchen cook. We go over customer service, controlling food costs, marketing. So a number of different issues that is covered across these programs. Next slide. In the NREF, we're what's called an intermediary for the U.S. Department of Labor, and so our role is really to lighten the load for our members. It's to help them with the paperwork. It's to help them crosswalk any sort of training program. So as I mentioned, we can provide all of the training materials. However, we also work with larger employers that might have a training program in place. We can crosswalk their training program, and if it hits 80% of our competencies, then they wouldn't need to change a thing. If they have, let's say they have 60% of our competencies, then we can match up some of our training programs to help compensate what they're doing. We'll help them, we'll train them on our reporting database. We work with a program called Build Within. The apprentice can go through and mark off all the competencies as they cover them. Their supervisor will double check and mark them off. It will track them as they progress through this program. We luckily, as a U.S. Department of Labor intermediary, are able to pay for our RTI services. So that is a great benefit. So there's zero cost for the employer. The only cost would be the wages that they pay their employee. And then obviously the apprenticeship offers opportunities for employee training. So next slide. So how would a company get started if they're interested? Well, they would contact our team. We have a team at the National Restaurant Association Educational Foundation that just covers apprenticeship. We would review the competencies and the standards with you to ensure that that this is something that you would be interested in, that the competencies are something that you would be able to cover. We use an employee questionnaire, which is essentially a Google form, which then we input that information into the forms that the USDOL provides. We would work on you with an employment agreement letter. So we would go over that paperwork with you, sign the commitment letter. We would do the training crosswalk. We would do onboarding for that. We would do onboarding for the Build Within platform. We would work with you to identify who your supervisors would be, and then recruit or register your current apprentices. And I would say the majority of our apprentices are current or incumbent employees. However, we are able to help with restaurants that are interested in using this as a recruitment tool, using job listings that will kind of describe the apprenticeship program. So you're not hiring them as a line cook, but you are hiring them to become a line cook, or you're not hiring them as a restaurant manager, but you are hiring them to become a restaurant manager. So we can help you with the job listing, what that would look like, with the questions that you would do for the interview process, and things of that nature as well. Next slide. And this is one of our apprentice sponsors. But we always say that employers want to hear from other employers. So that's another thing that we can do. We can connect you with our current employees that are doing this model. So you can talk to them about lessons learned, what they've seen as impactful for this. And that's been a great model for us, because it's really, they want to hear from people that are in their shoes. And that's something that we're able to do as well. And then here's my information as well as our website, which will kind of go over all of our different programs on the apprenticeship side. And that's it. Yep.
Thank you, Chad and Jim. Are there any questions from the attendees? Well, I do have a question. How are you engaging workforce development boards?
So we work with workforce development boards across the country. So in the apprenticeship world, there are two different types of apprenticeship states. There's the Office of Apprenticeship, which works directly with the U.S. Department of Labor and has national standards. And then there's state apprenticeship agencies, and they have specific state programs. And what we will do is we'll work with to get our occupations approved at the state level. And then we will work with state workforce boards to identify potential funding opportunities for restaurants, hotels, operators that might be available at that state level.
That's great. So you had mentioned that there are 2,100 high schools. Is that the correct amount, 2,100?
2,100, yes.
High schools across the country. So my question is, so how are you capturing them? How are you keeping those high school students engaged to either go into the apprenticeship program or pre-apprenticeship, to keep them in the, in the restaurant hospitality field?
So that's something that I think across our programs is something that we are always looking to do is, at the high school level, especially, we always say, so I oversaw the ProStart program. I came from the Virginia Restaurant Association, and I oversaw the ProStart program for Virginia. And we always say there's kind of three different types of ProStart or culinary students at the high school level. You have the students that are there because they are truly interested in culinary or, learning about the food service industry. You have the ones that are there because they think it's, an easy class. And then you have the ones that are there because they think that that's where they get to eat. And so it's a matter of identifying those students that are interested in the industry. Likewise with our Restaurant Ready program, we have people coming from a wide variety and looking to see, is this something that you're truly interested in? Because it can be a very transitional industry. Many people will work in it for 1 or 2 years and then leave. And so it's a matter of identifying those individuals that are interested in building a career within this industry. And that's another thing that we are also working on is showing the different opportunities that are available. Working with high school students, I'm either going to become a celebrity chef or I'm going to become, a famous restaurant owner. It's never anything in between. And so for us, it's showing that there are marketing positions, there are accounting positions, there are a number of different positions within, the restaurant and hospitality industry beyond just being a chef or being a restaurant owner.
So there's a question in the chat. Can you see that, Jim, or do you want me to read it?
Yep. As far as data, I wouldn't say that we have data, but we do, we know of, and I think, the Department of Labor might have a better grasp on this, that there's apprenticeship and then there's registered apprenticeship. So you'll see many people use the term apprenticeship because it's a training program. And when you look at apprenticeship, what's involved in apprenticeship within the culinary field, on-the-job training. That's happening in every kitchen across America right now, regardless if they're in an apprenticeship or not, or anything. on-the-job training is a component of what we do. Serve safe. The majority of people working in our kitchens are going to have serve safe. So they've done that related technical instruction piece. They might not have done it to the breadth that we've done it in our apprenticeship model, but they have gone through some sort of classroom or online training. And then obviously they're employees. So really apprenticeship is happening in our restaurants every day. We've been able to have a very structured way to do it for people that might not have that training infrastructure, HR infrastructure, that ability to do it. But we've also done it with large organizations that do have that infrastructure, and then they just use this as a great model. So.
There was another question in there, Jim, about the Baltimore City area, if you cover that area.
We do. So we're a national program. So we have apprentices from Alaska to Florida, and so and everywhere in between. So yes, we do cover Maryland, and we also work a lot of times with our state restaurant association. So we work with the Restaurant Association of Maryland as well, and to sometimes, like you said, identify some of those local, opportunities of support.
Great. Are there any other questions? Well, again, thank you.
I have a question.
Oh, go ahead.
This is Joanna Bartholomew, Board Liaison of the Baltimore City Workforce Development Board. And I was curious if there was a specific rep or how we could be able to maybe follow up with you for additional information. We are looking to add more representation around hospitality on our board. And then specifically within our workforce development agency, I know that creating more apprenticeships around hospitality is of strong interest.
I am putting my contact information in the chat.
Thank you.
So yes, please reach out to me, and I'm happy to start the conversation.
That's spectacular. Any other questions? Okay.
I have one more, Angela, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
I'm just curious of the businesses that are involved in your apprenticeship. Can you describe the level of effort that it's required to actually run on their side? And, to that point, do you see that it's more like restaurant groups that are doing apprenticeships? Or do you see that there are a lot of just one-off, I own one restaurant storefront, or I'm one hotelier that has one property and they're getting involved, or like what's that kind of underlying infrastructure requirement?
Sure. So that's the nice thing, is that it is extremely flexible. And so we work with everything from single operators that have one location to, we've worked with Brinker, which is essentially Chili's. We work with White Lodging, which has hotels across the country. It's a hotel management program or a company that owns hotels and full service restaurants all across the country. So really, the onboarding, it would take there's about 2 to 3 onboarding meetings, depending upon what we can group together. And that's going over the paperwork. And that is, going over the build within platform, going over the wage increase. So at the beginning, there's kind of those upfront meetings. And then, for the apprentice, we send out, if they're using our training materials, we send out access codes to them to retrieve all of their training materials. And that would then be loaded onto the build within platform as well. So really that build within platform is what the apprentice tracks their information with, the supervisor tracks their information with, and then we can even have, the owner operator or a regional training supervisor that can oversee multiple sites. We recommend working with the apprentice quarterly to check on that. We'll have people that do it weekly. We have people that do it monthly. We recommend to do it at least quarterly. But so it really depends on what that schedule looks like for each individual place. But I'd say we've seen a lot of programs that are like restaurant groups that are looking to grow rapidly. So smaller groups that maybe might have 4 or 5 restaurants that are looking to get to 10 or 15. And they use this basically as a training model as they open up new sites. We've seen that be very successful.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? So Jim, there's another question in the chat.
So we do have, it's an internal, I wouldn't call it social media, but we have an internal posting site that we can put, basically it's like a community of support, if you will. So we'll put, graduations on there. We'll put anytime our apprentice sites are highlighted in a local newspaper or things of that nature. We did a study last, I guess, 2 years ago now, where that is something that we found is that kind of a pain point is the mentor / supervisor. Many times they feel that there's an additional burden on them with many times no additional support, like income or otherwise. And so that's something that we are always looking to do is how can we support not only the apprentice, but really that supervisor.
Okay, so I don't see any other questions. So thank you to Jim and Chad again. And we want to thank all of you for attending the Power of Apprenticeships to address the workforce shortage. A recording of today's webinar will be available on the NAWB News and our YouTube channel for those who wish to revisit the content. Before you leave, please take a moment to complete the brief 2-minute survey that will pop up as you exit the Zoom. Your feedback is greatly appreciated. If you want to learn more about NAWB membership, please email us at nawb@nawb.org. Thanks again, and we look forward to connecting with you at future events.